Brian used to hate Fridays. That sounds strange because Friday was payday. For a few minutes he would feel rich. His phone would light up, the direct deposit would land, and the number in his bank account would finally look alive again. Then he would pay rent. Then he would look at what was left. That was usually the moment his stomach dropped. Not because Brian was careless. Not because he did not work hard. He worked 10-hour shifts, picked up extra hours when he could, and still felt like he was always one problem away from starting over. The worst part was not even being broke. The worst part was that payday stopped feeling like progress. It felt like a reset button. Every 2 weeks, the same thing happened. Money came in, money went out, and Brian ended up in the same place, waiting for the next deposit like it was oxygen. So when he saw videos about getting rich, he usually clicked away. Because the advice never sounded like it was written for him. Invest $10,000. Buy real estate. Brian did not even have $10,000 in his imagination. He had a checking account, a rent payment, a car that made a weird noise when it started, and a credit card balance he tried not to look at too long. So for a long time, he believed the same thing a lot of people believe. Rich people get rich because they make big money. People with small paychecks just try to survive. But one Friday, something small happened that bothered him more than usual. His paycheck came in at 6:12 in the morning. By 9:40, after rent and one automatic payment, most of it was gone. He had not bought anything fun. He had not made a bad decision. He had barely touched the money. And that was when he realized the deeper problem. His paycheck was not really arriving free. It was arriving already claimed. Before Brian even woke up, parts of that paycheck already belonged to the landlord, the bank, and last month's decisions. That thought stayed with him all day. At lunch, he opened his banking app again, not because he expected the number to change, but because he wanted to understand why it always felt like money disappeared faster than he could make it. For the first time, he did not ask, "How do I get rich?" He asked a smaller question. What part of this paycheck is actually mine to keep? At first, the answer felt embarrassing. Almost none of it. But almost none was not the same as none. There was a little space. Not a big space. Not enough to brag about. Not enough to make him feel wealthy. But after looking carefully, Brian found about $25 he could protect from every paycheck if he changed one habit and stopped letting one subscription renew. $25 felt too small to matter. He almost laughed at it. Then he remembered something Benjamin Franklin said, "A penny saved is 2 pence clear." Brian did not think a penny would make him rich. But he understood the point. Money that stays with you is different from money that passes through you. So he made a deal with himself. For the next 3 paychecks, he would not try to become rich. He would only try to prove that one piece of his paycheck could survive. That was it. The first transfer was $25. He moved it into a separate savings account the morning he got paid, before the rest of the month started arguing with him. It felt almost pointless. By the end of the week, he wanted to move it back. A friend asked him to go out. His gas tank was low. He was tired, and buying dinner sounded easier than cooking. That was the first test. And honestly, he almost failed it. Not because he was weak, but because his old life was still built to spend everything. That is what Brian slowly started to understand. If money stayed in the same account, it did not feel protected. It felt available. And available money always found a reason to leave. So on the next payday, he made the transfer automatic. $25 moved before he could negotiate with himself. Then he did it again. After 6 paychecks, the account had $150 in it. That number did not change his life. But it changed his belief. For the first time in years, Brian had money from old paychecks that was still there. That sounds simple, but for someone stuck in a paycheck to zero cycle, it felt like evidence. He was not rich, But he was no longer proving the old story true every 2 weeks. The next step came from a mistake. His car needed a repair. Normally, that would have gone straight to the credit card. This time, the small savings covered part of it. Brian was annoyed that the money disappeared, but later that night he realized something important. The savings had not failed. It had done its first job. It kept a problem from becoming a bigger problem. That was when his idea of wealth started to change. Wealth was not only the big number people show online. Sometimes wealth was a bill that did not turn into debt. Sometimes wealth was a Friday where the paycheck landed and not every dollar had to run away. After that, Brian stopped chasing the perfect plan. He built a small order. First, he protected a tiny gap. Then he used that gap to build a small emergency cushion. Then he attacked the highest interest debt that was eating future paychecks. Only after that did he start learning about long-term investing. Not because investing was magic, because he finally had a system that could feed it. Morgan Housel wrote, "Saving is the gap between your ego and your income." Brian felt that line in a practical way. It did not mean he could never enjoy his life. It meant every paycheck needed a gap between what came in and what disappeared. At first, his gap was $25. Then it became $50. When he paid off one small debt, he did not let the freed-up payment vanish. He moved part of it into the gap. When he got a small raise, he did not pretend he was suddenly rich. He let himself breathe a little, but he also increased the transfer. That was the quiet change. Before every improvement in his life got absorbed, a raise became a nicer phone plan. A refund became a weekend of relief. Now, part of every improvement was captured before it could disappear. That was the moment Brian stopped thinking of himself as someone who only earned money. He started thinking of himself as someone who kept money. Then he became someone who used money. That difference mattered. One night, he looked at a purchase he wanted to make. It was not huge, but it would have wiped out most of that month's progress. The old Brian would have asked, "Can I afford it?" This time, he asked a better question. "What does this give me back?" Warren Buffett said, "Price is what you pay, value is what you get." Brian started using that idea outside of investing. Some purchases gave real value. A tool that helped him earn more. A reliable repair. Groceries that made the week easier. Other purchases only gave him a few minutes of escape, then left him with the same stress. He did not become extreme. He did not stop living. He just started noticing the difference between spending that helped his future and spending that kept him stuck in the same loop. A year later, Brian was not rich in the way people use the word online. But he was different. He had a small emergency fund. He had less high-interest debt. He had started putting a small amount toward long-term investing after learning the risks and making sure his basics were stable. And maybe most importantly, he had stopped waiting for a huge paycheck to become a different person. That is where most people miss the lesson. They think the big paycheck creates the rich habit. But often the rich habit has to come first. Because if someone cannot protect $25 when the paycheck is small, a bigger paycheck may only give them bigger ways to stay trapped. More income helps. Of course it does. But more income without a system can disappear too. So Brian began working on the second part of the story. He used a little money and a little time to build a skill that could raise his income. Not by chasing every side hustle online. He picked one useful skill connected to better work, practiced it consistently, and used it to apply for a higher paying position. For one person, that skill might be learning basic bookkeeping and moving into an office role that pays $2 more per hour. That sounds small, but full-time, that can be about $4,160 more per year before taxes. For someone else, it might be learning sales, project management, coding, electrical work, design, or a trade certificate that helps them land a job paying $5 more per hour. Full-time, that can be about $10,400 more per year before taxes. And for another person, the skill might turn into a small business. A weekend service, a mobile car wash route, a simple online offer, tutoring, editing, lawn care, repair work, or anything useful people already pay for. Even $500 a month in extra profit is $6,000 a year. $1,000 a month is $12,000 a year. The point was not that everybody should pick the same path. The point was that a better skill can become a better job, a raise, a side business, or eventually a full business. It took months. There were weeks where nothing changed. There were nights where he wanted to stop because the progress felt invisible. But he had already learned something from the money gap. Small things do not look powerful while they are happening. They look powerful after they repeat. That was true for saving. It was true for debt. It was true for investing. And it was true for skills. Eventually, Brian did get a better paycheck. Not a lottery paycheck. Not mansion money. Just better. But this time, the raise did not disappear. Because Brian had built the system before the raise arrived. Part of the extra money increased his breathing room. Part of it went toward his future. Part of it let him enjoy his life without guilt. That balance mattered, because the goal was never to suffer forever. The goal was to stop living like every paycheck belonged completely to the present. And if this message is helping you look at your paycheck differently, subscribe to Professor Richman, because this channel is built for people who want to stop just getting paid and start building real options with the money they already touch. Now, let's pause and pull the lesson out of Brian's story. If your paycheck is small, the first goal is not to look rich. The first goal is to create a protected gap. That gap can be tiny at the beginning. The number could be $5, $25, or whatever is honestly repeatable. The number is less important than the habit of protecting it. If someone protects $125 per month, that is $1,500 per year. If that money is eventually invested for the long term at a hypothetical 7% annual return, compounded monthly, it could grow to about $152,496 over 30 years. Now, 7% is not the ceiling. It is just a simple long-term example. If a seasoned or sophisticated investor eventually understands risk, studies different assets, and builds a more aggressive, diversified portfolio, the numbers can look very different. At a hypothetical 12% annual return, that same $125 per month could grow to about $436,871 over 30 years. At 15%, it could grow to about $865,410. But higher returns do not come free. A diversified portfolio can reduce some risk, but it cannot remove risk. And chasing 12 or 15% usually means accepting bigger swings, bigger mistakes, deeper losses, and more responsibility. That kind of strategy is not for someone who still has no emergency cushion, high-interest debt, or no understanding of what they are buying. This is only an educational example, not personal financial advice. Returns are not guaranteed. Markets rise and fall, businesses fail, investments can lose money, and your debt, emergency fund, taxes, fees, timeline, and personal situation matter. But the deeper point is still true. Repeated money behaves differently from random money. Random money disappears. Repeated money becomes a buffer. Then it becomes debt freedom. Then it can become investments. Then it can become skills. Then it can become options. So if you're working with a small paycheck, do not start by asking, "How do I get rich fast?" Start with the question Brian asked. What part of this paycheck is actually mine to keep? Find that part. Protect it early. Give it a job. Let it survive long enough to become proof. Because the first protected dollar will not make you rich. But it can mark the moment the old cycle stopped winning. Same payday. Same world trying to spend your money. But now, a piece of that paycheck belongs to your future. And that is where the story starts to change. So keep going. You do not need to become perfect overnight. You just need to protect the next small piece, repeat it, and let proof build one paycheck at a time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.